Welcome to this explainer. Right now, we're looking at a completely quiet yet absolutely massive geopolitical shift. It's a situation where a routine administrative change is literally altering the map as we know it. There are no shots fired, no loud declarations, just a subtle, incredibly calculated shift in the waters off Taiwan. Let's dive right in. This ship is not gray. Let that stark realization just kind of hang in the air for a second. Imagine an airy dawn over the open ocean, right? No land in sight. A massive vessel emerges. But it isn't painted that traditional warship gray we've all come to expect in these geopolitical standoffs. Nope, it's a large cutter. White hull, a diagonal blue and red stripe. It's a Coast Guard vessel. And honestly, this simple change in color, that is the entire story. Moving right into Section 1, the white holes. So by July 2026, reports were placing two Chinese Coast Guard ships way offshore on Taiwan's Pacific side. Now, for decades, Beijing has pressed Taiwan with warships on the western side, in that 100-mile strait directly under mainland radars. But this shift to the eastern approaches, the open Pacific with its vital resupply routes, analysts are now calling this the new normal. It is a completely different strategic theater facing the rest of the world. Let's quickly trace the timeline. In June 2026, a task group led by the China Coast Guard ship Daishan began patrols on that eastern side. But the absolutely crucial point here is July 4th. The Daishan didn't just leave. It was replaced by the Xiushan to continue the exact same patrols. A single deployment is an event, right? A demonstration. But a relief? That is a roster. You do not rotate crews on an operation you intend to end. So this mundane bureaucratic housekeeping transformed a one-off patrol into a permanent, standing presence. Let's look at why this geographic shift matters in Section 2, the Pacific Door. This eastern side shelters the highly crucial ports of Hualien and Suao, which is basically Taiwan's back door. Just off the coast there, the continental shelf drops almost immediately into incredibly deep water, and that is exactly the kind of environment submarines absolutely love. But more importantly, Taiwan imports nearly all of its energy. In any kind of crisis, this eastern side is the essential lane for outside reinforcement, for food and for fuel. Closing this door changes the entire strategic reality. A pressure campaign that polices this eastern side means the Pacific door is firmly closed. Which brings us to Section 3, competing legal claims. We basically have three distinct entities applying entirely different sets of rules to the exact same water. First, there's Beijing. According to Chinese state media Xinhua, these patrols are for, quote, safeguarding the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese people, including Taiwan compatriots. So the logic there is strictly domestic. In Beijing's view, this is routine internal policing and civil administration for their own nationals, absolutely not foreign coercion. But on the exact opposite side sits Taipei's complete rejection of that premise. Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council states Beijing holds, quote, no sovereignty, no jurisdiction, and no law enforcement authority in those waters. To Taipei, this is fake law enforcement and a completely unacceptable unilateral expansion of power. Then we have the international perspective. In a pretty rare joint statement on June 24th, the de facto embassies of the UK, Germany, and France stated that these actions, quote, threaten regional stability and the freedom of navigation and safety of international shipping. To them, this unilateral change isn't just some domestic legal dispute. It's a direct threat to global maritime commerce. So you've got three governments, one stretch of ocean, and literally no shared map of who can lawfully stop a ship on it. This takes us into Section 4, the gray zone. Think about it this way. If you send a naval destroyer to stop merchant traffic, you instantly trigger some highly explosive vocabulary: blockade, act of war, alliance obligations. But if you send a Coast Guard cutter, well, on paper, that is routine policing. It's civil, it's unremarkable, the sort of thing pretty much every maritime nation does. The color of a ship's hull literally changes the world's vocabulary, keeping actions deliberately below the threshold of military conflict and rendering any response incredibly complicated. And this leads us to what's known as the sashimi strategy. It's this concept of calibrated actions cut so deliberately thin that no single slice justifies a military reaction. Yet over time, the shape of the whole silently changes without ever crossing a red line. It creates a virtually impossible dilemma for Taipei. If they confront these white hulls with warships, they risk looking like the escalating aggressor. But if they do nothing, they silently concede the water. Let's look at the practical implications in Section 5, rehearsing a blockade. So what are they actually doing out there on the water? Well, just look at the sheer volume of this number, 198. According to reporting by Defense News, during a single maritime traffic operation in early June, the China Coast Guard inspected 198 passing vessels. That is a massive, massive volume of commercial traffic being hailed and scrutinized under the banner of law enforcement. They are hailing commercial ships to ask for their origin and destination. They're conducting hydrographic seabed surveys, and they're patrolling directly over vital undersea cables. If you look closely, every single item on this list is a silent rehearsal. Stopping merchant traffic is the exact mechanism of a quarantine. Mapping the seabed, that prepares for submarine operations. This routine policing is silently building the architecture and procedures needed for a blockade, all without ever officially announcing one. Which leads us to our final point in Section 6, Taipei's drone answer. How on earth does Taiwan respond to an adversary that refuses to cross the military line? Well, with 210 billion new Taiwan dollars. That was the massive proposed budget ceiling under clause-by-clause review in late July 2026, and it's designated specifically for Taiwan's procurement of domestically developed defense unmanned systems, set to run all the way through 2031. The overarching goal here is to procure reconnaissance and attack drones and deploy well over 1,000 unmanned surface vessels. And honestly, the strategic instinct makes perfect sense. You answer a persistent, cheap Coast Guard presence with thousands of your own cheap, expendable eyes and holes. And remember, none of this is happening in a vacuum. These eastern approaches are also Japan's southern flank, specifically near the Miyako Strait, which is a gap the Chinese Navy and joint Chinese-Russian patrols also transit. Regional neighbors are watching these exact shared sea lanes incredibly closely. So I want to leave you with this thought. When coercion wears a Coast Guard uniform, who decides where the line actually is? The most dangerous aspect of a new normal isn't a loud explosion or some dramatic battle. It's how quietly the argument ends once everyone simply accepts the presence as normal. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.